The shutdown is finally over. Does that mean that holiday travel gets to get back on track and you guys are gonna be totally fine flying like you wanted to do? That's what I'm here to talk to you about today, guys. Hey everybody, it's Erica from America, your favorite flight attendant, and today is the second edition of Crew Room Chat, where I talk to you about what's happening in the airline industry news-wise, and what's the gossip in the crew room from both the pilots and the flight attendants about what's going on. But not just the crew room today, I've also got some tea from the office. So let's get into this with what's happening after the shutdown. Okay guys, I want to start off by talking about what travel was like right before the shutdown, right after the shutdown. I'm also going to talk about a couple of patterns that I noticed and that I've basically confirmed with my plane guy, the person who watches the planes every single day to see which planes need to be filled with flight attendants and which ones don't. They know the patterns better than anyone. And so I'm going to tell you what my plane guy told me, the guy that sits in my company's office and watches all of the planes that are coming in and going out. Now, just as a reminder, guys, I can't tell you what airline I work for because of contract confidentiality clauses that could get me fired. I'm just going to say that I work for a regional airline, which means I take smaller planes from big airports like O'Hare to little airports. I also want to say I'm going to mention flight times. And when I mention flight times, I want you to understand that this does not include taxi times. A lot of taxi times are usually built into the flight, and they usually average about 40 minutes built into a flight. And that's usually 20 minutes on each side. Sometimes if you're going into a big airport, they might add 25 or 30 minutes to that. For example, at O'Hare, there are some runways that if you land on them, it'll take 25 minutes to taxi to certain gates. And that's usually regional. The mainline ones usually get straight up to the gates within 15 minutes. But let's jump right into it. Just as a reminder, basically those 8 Democrats that caved and went against the party to shut down what was going on, which honestly I think is very sad because the people suffered for roughly 40 days for no reason whatsoever. But the fact that they announced on Monday, November 10th that the shutdown was ended. It didn't actually get signed until Wednesday. Still, the fact that it had been announced that it had ended, what did that mean at the airlines? So right now, the last picture I took before that happened was here, November 9th, 2025 at 5:54 p.m. I was at the airport that night. I work at O'Hare if you don't know this. And as you can see, all of the red here are the canceled flights, whereas all of the yellow are the delayed flights. Now you may be thinking that's United because that's United Blue Board. But actually, there is one set of gates at O'Hare where United has moved into American Airlines territory. And because of that, these particular monitors that I'm showing you have all of the flights in terminals 1, 2, and 3. So this one ends at Madison, Wisconsin. And the next one, we continue Madison, Wisconsin. And again, you can see all the red and all of the yellow. A lot of cancellations and a lot of delays. Now, I have to say, generally, there is roughly 20% delays late in the evening at O'Hare. If you hear me say ATC, that means Air Traffic Control Worker. So the ATC, we're about 3,800 short in the whole country. And all of this year, just on average for the last year or two, we've been roughly like 10 to 20% yellow on most of the boards. Not necessarily red. We don't necessarily see a lot of cancellations. Chicago is really good at making sure everybody gets out. And really the only reason that cancellations would often happen is either the weather was incredibly extreme or there was a maintenance issue and they just couldn't get that plane fixed in time that night. That's generally what happens at O'Hare. This is completely rare to see this much red. It is so unheard of. So again, this is Sunday, the 9th. Monday comes, the announcement is made. What's going on? Did they continue to make cancellations? The answer is yes. At O'Hare, they did. When I went into the office on Tuesday, which I have the boards for that in just a moment, Tuesday, I asked my plane guy, hey, how many cancellations have we had this weekend? And on this particular day, he said we had 40 cancellations. And on the day that those Democratic senators gave in, we had 50 cancellations. Apparently that's not necessarily the standard because there was bad weather in Chicago both Sunday and Monday, but 50 cancellations at our company is unheard of. 40 cancellations at our company is unheard of. So that was a whole lot on both the day before and the day of the shutdown being stopped. Now let's get into the boards the day after. So here is November 11th, 2025, 4:40 p.m. Not exactly the same time, but the cancellations were showing. When I went in and I took those pictures, I went in and I asked my plane guy, hey, how are we doing for cancellations? He said that we had about 7 or 8 that day. As you can see, Boston, Massachusetts, Des Moines, Iowa, and not too many on that one. It's hard to say which one that is. Even though it says Japan Airlines, there's no gate number. So I don't know if that was on the United side or on the American side, but here is the other side of those boards. Again, November 11th, 4:40 p.m. Not too much red. This is a red for arrivals here, if you notice. So not very many at all that day. How's it looking now? Here are the boards for November 18th, 4:23 p.m. As you can see, no red. Only yellow. And it's not a lot of yellow. Remember how I told you just a few minutes ago that we had about 20% delays at the beginning of the year? This is creepy. Here is the other side of those boards. And again, no red. Remember, this last board is arrivals. Just more yellow. So I did notice a pattern. What have I noticed about this? What's the crew room chatter? What's going on with the flights? First of all, holiday travel is always difficult for the airlines. It is our busiest time of year, even more busy than the summertime. And the reason that I say that is because every year our company declares critical coverage between right before Thanksgiving to right after the New Year's. That's how intense it is. They don't declare critical coverage during the summer. The only time that they ever did that was actually the summer after COVID. So like summer 2021. But Christmas time, they declare critical coverage, which for us means that if we call in sick, then we get double penalty points. And yes, that is exactly what it sounds like. We get penalized for calling in sick. And if you get enough penalty points, you can get fired. So it's always tight. But what does that mean for your travel? Now, as I mentioned, November 18th, this is an incredibly small number of delayed flights. Incredibly small. I would say that's not even 10%. Why is that suddenly happening? The pattern that I've seen this year happen is that at the beginning of the year, we're about 20% short. Then DOJ announced that they were cutting 1% of FAA workers, and we went from 20% to 80% delayed. Roughly 80% of our flights were delayed after that announcement was made. Later, they tried to say that it wasn't ATC people that they cut, that it was just the FAA. But then they also said it was mechanics, and that's a big deal because the mechanics are constantly working at the larger airports. They're constantly working at the smaller airports. You don't want to cut mechanics. But they said that they cut security and they cut other people as well. So we went from 20% late to roughly 80% late to the cancellations of the government shutdown. And now the government shutdown is done and the boards are like, what, 2-3% late? What is going on? So I have a couple theories about this, and I've talked it out with my plane guy, and this is what I've noticed. So real quick, when it comes to mainline flights, you can usually tell what mainline flights are because they'll either have a 3-digit number like this. They'll have a digit that starts with 1 like this. They will have flights that start with the number 2, but it only goes up to a certain number in the 2. It's like maybe the top 2,500 flight numbers will be mainline. Anything else from there on up is generally going to be the regionals. They don't put the regional airline names on the board. That's stuff like Piedmont, PSA, Republican, Envoy, SkyWest, Air Wisconsin, Denver Air, and others like that. There's a lot of regional airlines that fly under the United, American, or Delta colors. As far as I know, Southwest doesn't use regional airlines. So it seems like Southwest has the most flights. If you were to look up on the transportation website, I forget what it's called, the Board of Transportation something. It looks like Southwest has the most, but that's because they're not really using regionals as far as I know. They usually stick to their 737s, which is a larger plane if you don't know that. So that means all of these others could be regional or they could be mainline. So just to give you an idea, anything that's say 2,500 or less is mainline. This one I know is mainline. So it's delayed. This one is regional. A lot of these are regional, and that might be a plane issue. It might be a maintenance issue. It might be that the plane hasn't come in. It's obviously not a weather issue because if it was a weather issue, this board would be lit up with a lot more yellow. So the patterns that I noticed in flying are simply this. Let's go back to November 9th. The reason I'm pointing this out is because these are the flights that are most likely to get hit again if the government should decide to shut down again, say come January, which there has been chatter that they might do this again in January. They don't want to mess with the holiday season travel, but the Republicans have already said that when the Democrats bring a bill about healthcare to them in December, that they're probably not going to sign it, which means Democrats are probably going to walk out again. And if that does happen, it seems like that's going to happen in January. So your holiday travel should hopefully be just as normal as possible. The patterns that I noticed in this were that they seem to cancel either the planes that are least full, or they cancel the planes that have the shortest flying time and are closest to the airport. So for example, I believe Akron, Ohio, if I remember right, was about an hour of flying. And just so you know, for every 15 minutes of flying, that's about an hour of driving if the pathway is direct. If the pathway is not direct and it curves down and around, then it could be a lot more time. This is just a general estimation. Akron, Ohio from Chicago is about a 1 hour flight. And as you can see, United canceled 2 of them. Allentown, Pennsylvania, I think that's like an hour and 20. Austin, Texas, that's about 3 hours. So this one here, it's 2358. That is a mainline. So it's very likely that it was fairly empty. Baltimore, I think that's about an hour and 40, if I remember right. Bentonville, Birmingham, I think those are an hour and 40 to 2 hours. And those are all regional flights. Champaign, Illinois is a 30-minute flight. One of my favorites. Love that one. Cincinnati is about an hour and a half. And you can see 3 of them are canceled. Cleveland, Ohio, hour and a half. Columbia, Missouri, hour and a half. Columbus, Ohio, hour to an hour and a half. Dallas, Texas, 2.5. Dayton, Ohio, hour and a half. Some of these are mainline. I noticed with us, with the regionals, the flights that were canceled most seem to be within like a 1.5 hour or closer range at my company. Those aren't necessarily empty, but they're easy to drive to because a lot of those flights, especially the half-hour flights, would only be like a 2-hour drive from Chicago. So I did notice that they were canceling at our company the ones that were closer in. When I talked to my plane guy about this, like, what are you seeing? He also confirmed that it did seem like they were canceling mostly flights that were closer together. What he also noticed was that they were canceling flights that were more in the middle of the day versus in the morning or in the evening. So what that means for you is that if you are going to fly, you want to take the early morning flights and you may be sitting at the airport all day long if something like this should happen again with the cancellations. But they are trying to make sure that people are getting home at night. As always, I say always try to aim for at least 2 to 3 flights before the last flight of the day. Don't aim for that last flight of the day because you have a higher chance of getting stuck at O'Hare. And O'Hare gets flooded with passengers this time of year, which means there's not a lot of seats for them to roll you over and you don't want to get stuck for days at the airport. So those were the patterns that I've noticed. The other thing that is a theory, it's just a theory that I have. I think the reason that the boards are this quiet, that they're absolutely getting everything out on time, I think that it's very likely routes have already been cut. Not individual flights, but actual routes. And I wouldn't be surprised if the airlines, what they would have gone in and done was looked at which flights are the smallest flights, like which have the least number of passengers, because it would make sense to cut those first. Also looking at airports that have several flights throughout the day that aren't full. Say Traverse City, which I mentioned in the last video. Traverse City gets maybe 4 flights a day. So if they have 4 flights a day, it makes sense to cut one of those. And you still have 3 flights. You're losing 1. But Traverse City isn't always full, so that pushes more people onto those 3 flights, which does not only increase the airline's bottom line for how much money they can make per flight, but it also makes sure that the plane is full and it helps them cut down. So I think the airlines have actually cut enough routes just here and there, not enough to make too much of an impact on the travelers, but enough to help the ATC people out, because these are the quietest boards that I have seen all year. So I think your travel is going to be really good this holiday season. What I do want to tell you is you want to make sure, get those early morning flights and expect that you might be sitting in an airport all day long. Thank you guys for joining me for another Crew Room Chat. See you guys in the next video whenever there's a problem in the airlines. Ciao!